Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
A fairly credible source says that somewhere around 70%, that's 70% of employees in general, are significantly more stressed during the holidays. It's probably not a surprise to you, but it does point to a seasonal balancing act that can be distracting for the regular momentum of business and commercial activity, for sure. I'm Chris Williams, so happy holidays, and welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy, this time on CBR. Before we go completely native for the festivities of the season, we will check in with our regional experts. And later on, North Carolina's former commerce chief comes again, John Skvarla.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Gregory W. Brown, Ph.D. of the UNC Keenan Institute of Private Enterprise, Terry Keating of Accord Financial, and special guest John Skvarla, Senior Government Relations Advisor from Nexsen Pruet.
Happy holidays. Welcome to our program. Is that stressful for you guys when I say happy holidays? Do you feel that stress over the holidays? It's distracting?
Well, go ahead.
There's certainly more going on, so it adds to it in that way. I enjoy the period. Now, I got married over the holidays last year, so.
So it's well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Didn't know that. Greg, is that something that comes up in class, in school, in lectures around stress over the holidays?
Well, there's always a big push at the end of the academic year to get exams done and get things graded so you can enjoy the holidays. But then it's a nice 2 or 3 week break for sure for students and for the faculty.
Well, welcome, gentlemen, again, welcome to the program. Dr. Brown, let's talk about collaboration. Keenan Institute at UNC has something to do with this. You know, in North Carolina, in South Carolina, there is a huge push, obviously, to be part of the Amazon HQ2 effort and win that deal. In North Carolina specifically, we had the chair of the RTP Foundation, Smedes York, on recently, and Smedes was talking about how he was surprised, not surprised, but pleasantly surprised by all of the agencies and the different folks that have come together to make this bid for what is going to be quite a marquee recruitment deal. How, in reflection of Amazon's HQ2, how does collaboration, I mean, how does it work in this contemporary application of how we're talking about it now? I mean, when people say collaboration, do you believe they really are collaborating toward this end goal?
Well, I think they are in this case because it's such a huge prize. The Keenan Institute is really all about collaboration. We think of ourselves as the outreach arm of the business school. So we're always looking for opportunities to engage with the private sector and different government agencies to try to promote good economic outcomes, and this would be a huge economic outcome. And I mean, it's a big prize. There's just going to be one winner. But I think whether or not we're the winner, and by we it could be any part of North Carolina or South Carolina, I think the fact that it has brought people together in ways that maybe they didn't collaborate previously is going to be a lasting benefit for the states.
Before we go on, Terry, I promise I'm going to bring you this dialogue. Collaboration, I think when you talk about collaboration, it seems like people forget that collaboration also means giving up something to be part of it. Am I right to say that?
Well, and I think the state has to think that there's really going to be one big local winner, but really the state as a whole and really the region as a whole is going to be a winner. So to the extent that we need to coordinate across different areas to improve the odds of us all benefiting, I think that's giving something up.
Terry, your firm, Accord Financial, Canadian-owned, by the way, and notice from the dual flags flying on your lapel there, but I knew that anyway. You talk about regional. It seems like Accord has figured out the regional aspects of this. Do you think, we were talking before the program, and Toronto is one of the list cities that Amazon could end up. Do you think Toronto could win this deal?
I think they certainly could. It's the biggest part of the Canadian economy. It's a very dynamic, still growing city. And I think there's no question that they could be. It's close proximity to the U.S. Would make it, even though it's outside the U.S., would make it easy for them to serve the eastern seaboard from that.
What has Accord learned about collaboration and regional cooperation?
Well, we operate, it's not only the U.S. and Canada, but in Canada we operate in all of the provinces. And so we operate in Quebec and we operate in the Ontario province. And the collaboration between those two is almost like across a national border.
Really?
Because in Quebec you have to work in French. It's French law. And there's just almost a culture of, well, we're from Quebec and you're from Ontario. So it's part of what we deal with every day. We are on a very intense push these days to bring our businesses closer together, both across Canada but across the U.S. So that's learning to internally collaborate in some different ways. We've been a little bit more geographic silos historically than we're quickly becoming today. And so it's not just Greenville. We made 2 acquisitions this year. Yeah. We acquired a business in Chicago. We acquired a business in California. So it's how do we knit those together? And it's challenging, but that's what we get paid to do.
Yeah. Greg, how does tax reform, this current dialogue around tax reform, overlay on all these things we talked about, not just economic development, but in general, end of the year, what's going to happen next year? How do you think it all fleshes out with tax reform?
Well, I think there's an increasing realization that there's important parts of the tax code that are outdated. And on the corporate side, speaking from a business perspective, I think there's increasing realization that the U.S. has lost its competitiveness in terms of corporate tax rates. So, whether people like it or not, or they think it's fair or not, I think for the U.S. to remain competitive, something's going to need to happen that's meaningful on the corporate. And that could just be lowering rates, or it could be a series of longer-term changes in terms of how we think about global business from a U.S. perspective. Yeah. I'm sure that as a company that operates in both Canada and the U.S., this is an issue that's important for you all.
It's very important to us. I mean, we have a very elaborate tax structure to minimize.
You're talking about U.S. versus Canada?
Yeah, to try and minimize our tax exposure in the U.S. So it hasn't changed where we think we want to grow, because the U.S. economy is so large versus the Canadian economy. We want to grow there, we want to grow here. But it kind of behind the scenes affects how we finance our businesses.
Is it prohibitive for you though, Terry? Will Accord look at this and go, gosh, if this one thing were changed, we'd be a heck of a lot better? Or do you just kind of accept it like a headache over a period of time?
You accept it like a headache. Yeah. When we think about growth, the opportunity for our company to grow is so much bigger in the U.S. So we're going to grow here, regardless of the tax code. It's not going to change what we do, but it will still affect us. We spend a lot of time and energy thinking about it. But we'd rather not.
Yeah. I would imagine for many companies, it may not affect where you want to grow, but it could affect how you grow there, right? In terms of where investments are made.
Well, but let me ask you this, Greg, because you were, as you talked about being a researcher in the Fed years ago, you kind of have that analytical and critical thinking. So an economist said to me offline earlier this week, we were talking about tax reform. How boring is that, right? We were talking about tax reform, and he said, it's not tax reform. And he was very adamant about it. He said just like that, it's tax change. It's not tax reform. Reform leads you to believe that on a molecular level there's some change going on. He said this is kind of a shifting of the deck chairs on not the Titanic, but on a ship. Is this just a tax change that's going to sunset at some point?
Well, it could, but I think having a reduction in the the tax impact on business is a real change. If you think about what's happened in the recovery in the U.S. in the last 10 years, it's been extremely slow productivity growth, very low capital investment by corporations in the U.S. And I think one of the reasons is that there's economic disincentives, tax disincentives to making that type of investment that would grow productivity, and that's something that's a real drag on the economy in the long run. So if there are things that we can do to make the business climate more conducive to capital investment and increased productivity, that's ultimately going to benefit everyone. It does come at a cost, though, because if you reduce corporate taxes, that's a real hit to revenue. So we have to figure out how to offset that, and that's a tough choice, right? Someone has to, in the short run at least, bear that cost.
Terry, Accord Financial, in about 1 minute. Accord Financial seems to be strapped on the edge of a helicopter blade on this one, and I'm talking about NAFTA. Trump administration is not a fan of NAFTA, but a lot of people who are both sides of the border, U.S. and Canada, are for it. I'm assuming Accord is for it.
Yes.
At what risk would a negative outcome be for Accord on this NAFTA agreement if the Trump administration did submarine the issue?
Yeah, it wouldn't affect us directly, but it would affect us all indirectly because it would diminish trade and productivity between the countries. I think it's unlikely that we would see a sea change in it because the supply chains across the borders are so deep and so elaborate. It would be very disruptive to industry to have a large change, to tinker with it, change some of the rates, and maybe even some of the incentives out. Certainly that probably bears being done. I think that's widely agreed upon. But to just tank it, I think it would be devastating to parts of our economy. That would indirectly hurt us. Again, it's like taxes, though. It wouldn't be something where we would say, okay, well, we have to completely change our business.
Dr. Brown, just a few seconds. Would sunsetting NAFTA be a drag on GDP growth in the U.S.?
It absolutely would. We should. We need to maintain trade agreements, but at the same time, we need to appreciate there has been real dislocations in the domestic economy that are related to trade. It may not be NAFTA. It may be just the natural evolution of economic activity, but things like agriculture, things like lower tech manufacturing, those going to other countries, not just Mexico, but many other countries, and becoming automated, has had a real economic impact on people in North and South Carolina, especially.
Okay.
Right?
Gentlemen, stay with us, please. We're going to continue the conversation. Coming up in our program, a two-part series. These are always one of the fun, I would guess one of the more fun programs of the year for us because it's two-part. But more importantly, we have resident economists, and they always like to get together. It's unscripted, and sometimes it's a bit like the squared circle wrestling match with these four gentlemen. Dr. John Connaughton from UNC Charlotte, Dr. Mike Walden from NC State, Dr. Frank Hefner from the College of Charleston, and Dr. John Sylvia, the chief economist at Wells Fargo, will be here for two-part. And then coming up also, Andrea Smith is the head of global HR for Bank of America. She will be our guest on an upcoming program as well. There is no holiday break for issues like tax and healthcare debate, of course, or regional economic recruiters who chase corporate relocation trophies like Amazon's HQ2, Toyota Mazda, CSX, et cetera, et cetera. Our guest spent a few years doing just that. He was most recently the immediate past Secretary of Commerce for the Tar Heel State. We welcome again John Skvarla. Welcome back, John.
Chris, always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, sir. John, you've heard the conversation, but we talked even before the program. How would you handicap North Carolina's effort to get this Amazon plum?
Well, if you take the criteria as published, Charlotte, North Carolina should be the winner.
Just statistically?
Just based on the criteria they published.
Okay.
The problem is they don't publish all the real factors. Very few people realize that Raleigh-Durham came in second to Boston for GE. And the untold factors were things like, and this was told to me by their CFO, who's, I guess, departing January 1, that rubbing elbows with other Fortune 50 CFOs was very important to him. And Raleigh-Durham doesn't have Fortune 50 CFOs. So if there's criteria about being the 800-pound gorilla in the room, that influences the decision that isn't necessarily stated in the pure factors. So, but if you take the pure published information, Charlotte wins hands down.
Is it the economic developers that have to read between the line to know what, not what the stated goal is, as you said, or the attributes that they're looking for, but to be able to read, yeah, but maybe they do want to be the biggest fish in the pond?
I don't think the economic developers get to that level. I think at the end of the day, that's the chairman, the CFO, the CEO. They make that call. I think political factors come into play. If I had handicap Amazon, I'm giving Northern Virginia the odds-on favorite because of just the political clout that you would gain by doing something like that. I think Toronto is a sleeper. I think Toronto they could be a real 800-pound gorilla there. But I think at the end of the day, you know, is there a hard Republican, hard Democrat proclivity? You know, Mr. Bezos tends to be more left than the North Carolina General Assembly.
Well, and he owns the Washington Post.
And he owns the Washington Post, and he made a big investment personally up there for his residents. Those are the kind of things at the end of the day. When you get down to the final 4 or 3 or 2, as Greg said, the economic factors are an eyelash apart. The incentives are number 5, number 6.
Truly number 5?
Oh, sure. You got workforce, you got logistics, you got airports, you got location, you got all that. Incentives are the headline.
I'm sorry, John. Even if New Jersey's stacking up billions of dollars in incentives? No?
It's the headline. What happens at the end of the day, and I think Metropolitan Life was a great example. They moved 2,500 people to North Carolina, beautiful facilities that they're expanding in Raleigh. They moved about 1,200 or 1,300 Charlotte. Got a big incentive package, but at the end of the day, that was for the board of directors. That was the headline. We got $100 million from North Carolina. It doesn't say, but we turned down $200 million from Illinois or something like that. It truly is number 5 or 6. Okay. The incentives are a headline.
Greg, question?
Well, I'm curious now that you've got a little bit of distance from your time in the Commerce Department, looking back on that, what are things that you think the government, it could be state government, but just the government in general could be doing to promote economic development that they're not doing right now?
Oh, thank you for asking that, because it's been one of my pet issues for all my time, including at Environment and Natural Resources. The big issue in North Carolina is urban-rural divide, like it's the big issue in every country in the world. You go to the Czech Republic and they talk about the urban-rural divide. You go to Canada, by heavens, if there's not an urban-rural divide in any place in the world, it's Canada.
Yep. Absolutely.
We have the tools and the resources to solve that problem in North Carolina, and we're not talking about it. Do you know the state of North Carolina owns 12,000 buildings over 3,000 square feet? Do you know we own 880,000 acres of vacant land? 220 is the parks. 660,000 acres of net available land. We have an Escheats fund that's got about $1 billion in it that requires no return. You could marry the assets of the state of North Carolina with the real estate assets and a thin layer of early stage equity. We could turn this state into something that nobody else in the world has.
What is it? I'm sorry to jump in front of you here, Terry, but what is it? Is it just political will to not climb that political mountain to argue each one of those cases?
I think it's a combination of understanding. I mean, it takes a little bit of these guys to educate. I did a 21 region tour of the state of North Carolina that touched all 100 counties talking about this very issue. The head of the Carolinas SBA was so excited about this, she went to every one of those tours and said, I will put money on top of anything you do. Just give me a thin layer of equity. 15,000, 20,000, 10,000. And see, the beauty is coming out of the Escheats Fund, you could do it. It could be what I'll call poor man's venture capital. It doesn't require a 20% annualized return. It would be public-private. Could you imagine the tens of thousands of logistics and construction and legal and accounting jobs we could create simply by using our own resources? And it's all sitting right there as big as a beach ball. All we could do is get a bat off our shoulder. So we would have the best of all worlds, because clearly we have a very robust urban economy in this state.
Right. Absolutely.
But we could solve all of the other issues with assets. People would be beating feet to this state if we had programs like that.
Terry?
So the state has grown. South Carolina has grown. And you're saying it could grow more, but how do we get people to think about it and talk about it? And I think particularly in this age of, there's a change in the social discourse and what we seem to talk about and don't talk about. And we talk more about polarized political things than real economic issues at the federal and the state level.
And the tragedy is economic development should be agnostic. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a conservative or a liberal, it should be agnostic, because at the end of the day, without a fundamental economy, we've got nothing. You can have all the wonderful platitude programs in the world, but somebody's got to pay for them. And economic growth is the way to do that. And we think in terms of incentives. Incentives is the big one. But the reality is it should be the fundamental blocking and tackling, using our own resources to bridge that gap.
And so then is the critical question, how do we get people talking about it and talking
Political
in
leadership.
Reasonable terms about
Political
things,
leadership.
rather than you are on the left, I'm on the right, so you're the enemy?
It's political leadership. But economic development, fundamental economic growth should be the baseline for everybody. Then you can decide how to use the success in different social programs. Because the reality is, whether it's health care or something else, we have enough money to solve all these problems. It's just, can we prioritize it and spend it efficiently?
Greg?
Well, we've got to generate to begin with.
Sorry, Greg?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this question of depoliticizing the discussion is an important one. We've been trying to reach out to people in the investment community, thinking that these are people that are going to put business ahead of politics, and seeing what kind of solutions we can find, how we can bring people to have a more academic discussion about what needs to be done. But we hear interesting things from people, especially going back to the question of rural-urban divide, that when we talk to businesses about trying to grow or locate in rural areas, there is this question of labor force and talent. The labor force has changed very much as people have left rural areas, young people especially. So, how do we go into areas that are now distressed and aging and try to convince businesses that they should be locating in a place where the demographics don't really look very friendly to them?
And that's why using our own assets, our own state assets, that has no cost associated, will attract and lure those people back. One of the 5 Marines getting out of Camp Lejeune, they're mustering out. They want to start a small engine repair shop or an HVAC. Why can't they do that in Jones and Onslow County? They can. We just need to give them a little bit of help. If you ever had back surgery, the doctor tells you to use your finger on the edge of the night table and just give yourself a little boost. You don't have to just pull yourself out of bed. That's what we've got. We've got the assets and the resources to give everybody a little boost.
Well, okay, John, well, now that, Greg, you said so eloquent, you've got some time between you and the office, and you can look at it a little bit more objectively. And back to your point about collaboration, why don't North and South Carolina drop some of the competitiveness and say, listen, we're an area of 15 to 16 million people. It's vibrant. We've got it going on. Why don't we figure out how to even more work together economic developmental wise? I don't get that part. We're all familial. I mean, it's the Carolinas, right?
Yeah. I hear you. And candidly, I have had a very good relationship with the Secretary in South Carolina, and I have personally worked very hard to say, let's do the best thing for the customer where it is. But at the end of the day, you've still got this political divide. I mean, look at Europe. I mean, Lord, you go 200 miles and you're in a different country, and it's almost like they don't talk to each other.
Well, in some cases they don't.
And we have about a minute left. Question.
Yeah, it seems simple, and I feel like we keep harping on this, but I wonder, what can we do as individuals and business people to advance this agenda?
I've talked till I'm blue in the face. I've talked all over the state of North Carolina. You in South Carolina and we in North Carolina have tremendous assets that are producing no revenue. And we need to harness the effect of what we already own. And let's create that opportunity, whether it's in North and South or both. And we're not.
And doesn't ultimately, though, the political will come from the business people and the voters?
In 30 seconds, and John, can you wrap that up?
I'm not sure it's just the business people. I think there are forces that aren't business forces that also demand services, whatever. And so I think it's a question of voter block. I think it takes real political leadership, having a vision for the future that's easy to understand.
Thank you and you might have to keep talking yourself till you're blue in the face for another decade for it to catch on, but I hope you keep it up. Nice to have you back on the program.
Thank you, always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Terry, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Greg, welcome. Happy holidays to you both, you all three. Thank you for watching our program. If you have any questions or comments, please take the time. Go to carolinabusinessreview.org. It's one long word, but it's worth the trip, carolinabusinessreview.org. You can watch past programs, make comments, or suggest programs. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.